Welcome to the second Duel Masters podcast, name still pending as at the time of recording. But anyway, I'm again joined by Andrew, and we thought with the release of the fourth Duel Masters Plays set, we noticed a very significant divergence from the TCG we were accustomed to. You know, in the first three sets of Duel Masters Plays, the game felt very similar to the TCG, but then because of cards like Heaven's Gate, we found that things were really getting out of control. So the topic of this podcast is power creep.
I think we should start off by explaining what Heaven's Gate is for those people who don't play DM plays.
Okay.
So Heaven's Gate is a 6-mana light spell. It's a shield trigger that allows you to play 2 of your blockers from your hand. So with the release of the new set, you can just play that on turn 6 and play like 2 extremely powerful blockers. Even blockers back in the TCG, like what was his name? I keep getting Sarius and Cyrus. I think it's how you say it.
I'm gonna look this up.
The
real
11K
quick.
one.
Sirius Firament Elemental. Sirius.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. So that one was like back in the TCG, you would never see him at all because he's 11 mana and nobody has time for that. but when you can cheat him out for 6 mana, especially 2 of them, you know, it becomes a bit different.
Yeah, it is a bit much. And in the TCG, or actually even in Duel Masters Plays prior to Heaven's Gate, there weren't really many ways of, air quotes, cheating out a creature. I mean, you had cards like Kokolupia, right, which reduced the cost. I'm not sure if LFX was out on DMP, but he's not very good. And
he's out in DMP, but he isn't played.
And in the TCG, you had the kind of like air quotes soul swap line of spells, so like soul swap, transmogrify, and rapid reincarnation. But I don't think we ever saw cheating out creatures on a scale like Heaven's Gate. You know, like soul swap is just one at a time, right? And you had to exchange something. Whereas with Heaven's Gate, you know, it's just you basically pull these big boys out of your butt.
Yeah, exactly. And what happens the turn after is you just break with them. So remember Sarius. I'll get a one of these days.
Serious.
Serious. This is pretty serious. You would just like triple break your shields.
Yeah.
And then like the game ends like super fast. So like all your control decks, they don't have time to react.
Yeah.
Which is the main issue. Coming back to power creep. So I like to think of power creep as when you print cards that are like without a doubt better than either like previous versions or the metagame at the time. So if you think back to Heaven's Gate again, the metagame in a way wasn't ready for something of that speed.
Right.
And once you print a card like that, similarly you could also think about it from the perspective of Bombazar for our TCG friendly friends.
Yep.
Is when you print a card that kind of shapes the meta in a way. It just becomes like you have to play cards to like deal with it. Otherwise, you know, you're not going to have a great time playing.
Yep.
So that's how I like to think of power creep.
Yeah.
Do you have any other thoughts?
It's pretty similar for me. Really, it really refers to the practice of where companies or developers release increasingly powerful cards or abilities in other mediums. I guess in this case, cards, as the life of the game progresses. And this is really a commercial strategy, right? Because if the old cards are the most powerful, then there's no reason to buy the new cards. So you gotta power. That's why it's called power creep, because ideally it's something that happens slowly rather than a spike. And then, when you look back, it's like, oh wow, yeah, you can see how the game really evolved. But you know, sometimes they get real strong real quick. But yeah, it's something that companies do to sell more cards.
And I'm trying to think of like blatant examples of power creep where obviously like either of these cards are probably not all that well played, but say you have like a 4 mana 5k, and then like 10 sets later, you have a 4 mana 7K, for
Yes.
example. So that's like an obvious example of power creep.
Yeah.
But you have other not so obvious examples as well, where you have these basically new abilities of cards that just like overwhelm previous cards at that mana cost, and that's another example of what I like to think is power creep as well.
Yeah, that's fair. I think there are some better examples. Okay, this is not a Duel Masters example, but if we look back to Yu-Gi-Oh, in the very early days, 4-star 1900 attack was considered as good as it gets. But then, if you fast forward a couple of years later, you actually have cards like I think it's called like Gene Warped Werewolf. It's like 4-star, but 2000 attack points. So, and then I'm sure there will be more radical examples that even I am not familiar with. But I think that's a very it's a very apples to apples comparison, right?
Yeah, that's right. No, we've been out of the game for a bit, but even then, I do remember that power level was a huge deal back in the day for Yu-Gi-Oh as well. So basically, like in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's not the same as Duel Masters where you can only attack like tapped creatures.
Yeah.
In Yu-Gi-Oh, you can attack any creatures, right? So your power level matters a lot.
Yeah. So now that we've kind of gone over what power creep is, let's talk about what your perspective is on how power creep has been managed during DMP's life, because obviously you've had a more hands-on experience than myself.
So one thing I will say is that like I'll give props to the balance team that they have. They kind of deal with the problem before it gets too big. So if you think back to like even when they're printing cards, things like Bombazar, for example, I think is in a extremely better state than he was back in the TCG. And even cards like what else, like Cranium Cramp, for example. Having that 1 mana edition is actually a huge deal. Playing, especially during the early to mid turns, that 1 turn difference makes a whole lot of difference. So I think they, I don't know if it's like I should give them praise for it or they're just seeing it play out back in the OCG, back in the TCG.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
But no, it's good on them for like addressing the problem early. And even if they do make a mistake, for example, when they printed Diamondia, they gave her a bit too much.
Yeah.
They addressed that pretty quickly as well. So it looks like they're looking out for the meta game, which is a really good sign, especially if you think about the entry of more and more sets. It's going to be harder and harder to kind of make the meta game as balanced.
Yeah.
But tackling the problem earlier is always a good sign.
Okay.
Yeah. There was something else I was going to say, but maybe I'll come back.
Okay, so I'll give you my perspective from what I've watched, and then you can just chime in and give your thoughts or correct me if I've identified something incorrect. But power creep in DMP seems to have been extremely blatant. Every time a new set drops, the old decks are invalidated completely. When set 2 dropped, it was either Aquan or Astral Reef. And then in set 3, it was like Bombazar everywhere. I guess in saying that, Astral Reef did have some staying power. I'm not sure if that's a good or bad thing. I guess it depends on what your opinion on the card is. And then now in set 4, actually, no, even in set 3, like you had, what was his face? Galzark. He was everywhere.
Yeah, he was everywhere.
Not much variety there. And now in set 4, you have Heaven's Gate and Dolgeza, right? Those sorts of decks.
Yep.
So
no, I think when I was thinking about before, you kind of the two words gets thrown around a lot is balance and power creep, right?
Yeah.
There's they're kind of interchangeable, but there is a difference. Mm-hmm. So like you said, I also feel like when you look at just the types of decks that are being played right now, it's always the new cards that dictate like what the meta game is, rather than having most of your cards be from older sets and then just having a few new additions.
Yeah, because
yeah, like you have your decks revolved around the new cards, rather than having like, I don't know, maybe you can play a few more Fairy Life into your old decks.
I totally get that. And it's pretty interesting you bring that up because, again, I'm going to draw from our experience with other card games. With Pokemon, the card game we most recently played, what would happen is when a new set would drop, there would be an archetype the developers were trying to push, but then at large, the metagame would remain fairly stable, so the old decks would still be able to keep up. Whereas, going back a decade to our Yu-Gi-Oh experience, it's like when a new set drops, usually it's kind of like what's happening in Duel Masters plays. Like the developers were like, we want Light Sworns to be good, so that's what people are gotta play.
A bunch of cards. Yeah, definitely.
So
yeah, I have mixed feelings about that. In a way, it keeps the game fresh, but on the other hand, it also makes it harder for people to, or especially new players, to get into the game as well. There's always the saying that how like your best card is your credit card, and
I can agree with that.
Like what you brought up before, it is a commercial business to them, so they, in that way, like, you do have to give them some leeway.
What long-term effect do you think this rate of power creeping will have on Duel Masters plays? Because, naturally my scope is limited and I'm kind of maybe pessimistic, I guess. But I'm kind of worried that this because power creep happens so fast, it sort of discourages players from getting into the game because, not everybody is going to have disposable income they can allocate to Duel Masters plays. Not everybody can spend a lot of time grinding. So you don't want to be put in a situation where you have these people who sort of don't use their credit card, but they acquire the good cards through more organic means. And then a couple of weeks later, they're made totally useless. And so that, as a player, that doesn't feel very good.
Yeah, exactly. And even when you're trying to start, like, think about playing a new card game, you instantly look out what the best decks are.
Of course.
And once you see just how much it costs to make these decks, there's a huge barrier towards entry, and you might say, like, you could gradually gradually gain more and more gold, for example, when you play the game, but you always got to feel like you're missing out when you don't have the cards.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, that's
so in a way, I don't know, I still have mixed feelings to put it at that.
So how would, let's say I'm the developer of Duel Masters Plays, and then I went up to you and I was like, all right, Andrew, how would you manage power creep if you think we're doing such a terrible job?
Well, I think I'll say that I don't think they're doing a terrible job.
And that's why I like you, Andrew. That's why you work here.
Exactly. But maybe limiting the number of cards that they print, or the number of what they put forward as like their game-defining cards. Usually what they do is they have those cards be the highest rarity, so people don't get them as easily from packs or from like crafting them. So another way to kind of address the problem is by having the cards a lot more attainable. So having them do become cheaper to make or to obtain by making them a common instead of a rare. I think that would help a bit.
That's a really good idea. I like that. I never even thought that. Never even crossed my mind. Okay, continue.
Yeah, because yeah, you get what do they call them? Like super rares, a lot less, a lot less.
Like the pull rates are just lower, right?
Yeah, the pull rates are like dramatically lower. Yeah, so I guess that's one, and otherwise, yeah, just print less like game defining cards. It is hard to predict, and also how the meta game will shape up.
Yes.
A lot of times I find with previous games like Hearthstone is that there's always a few cards that kind of slip through the radar, and those cards, aren't typically your legendaries or your super rares. But yeah, so having less amount of game defined, like less bomb bazaars.
Okay.
The other I remember what I was going to say before.
Sure.
If you look at the cards in the set, if you go from the first set,
yeah,
and just by going through the set, you just see like all these cards. Probably, I would say 70 to 80% of these cards aren't being played in any sort of deck anymore, which is a big surprise, because I remember back when the game was first released, you would see all sorts of different decks on the meta game, on the in plays just from the base set itself.
Yep.
And you would see all these different cards being utilized in so many cool ways. And I feel like as the sets gets released, those strategies kind of just fall off, and you have an influx of new cards and new strategies to play with. That it's really a shame that some of these cards they're super cool and they don't get utilized.
Yeah, that's a good point. I see what you mean. So to summarize your thoughts, make busted cards easier to get. So maybe introduce, either decrease the rarity, or I guess they could introduce some sort of daily reward system, right? Like if you win X games in one day, then you win like a special art of something, right?
Mm-hmm. They actually did that recently with this duel challenge where you play this really jank format. It's pretty funny. You start off with 10 mana.
Yeah.
And you only get 2 cards.
Oh man. So that's pretty wild.
So people come up with all these weird strategies. I see people play like Cranium Clamp a lot, because imagine if you start first and your opponent starts with 2 cards.
Right.
So you just 5 mana lost soul.
That's pretty degenerate, but okay.
And then you have obviously your high costing cards are a lot more playable. So you've got cards like
Serious.
Serious.
Hardcast Serious, baby.
There's also the I forgot the name of it. Alexia. I think she was useless back in the TCG, but she got changed.
Okay. All right.
But she's like 7 mana, and you play him, and she's like 18k. Breaks like 4 shields.
Sounds fair.
Sounds fair. But yeah, so that was pretty cool. And if it's based on a point system, so like every game you win, you get like 1,000 points, and once you acquire, I think it was like 30,000 points, you get a free copy of Bombazar.
Oh, so that's okay. I like that. That's nice.
Yeah. So that's a pretty unique way of kind of giving more cards to players.
I really like how I got your perspective there, because the ideas that you came up with are great ideas, and they're ones that never even crossed my mind. Because what I was going to suggest was that maybe just release sets slower, so it gives people more time to play with the cards that they have. But then I guess the counter argument to that is, well, it's a business. We got to keep printing sets. So perhaps
I do wish that they do slow down things a bit, because you like back what I mentioned previously, you have all these cool strategies that people come up with, even like a month on from the set, you have these new strategies that people come up with, and it is just a shame when you discover something and then bam, there's a new set, and the strategy isn't viable anymore.
Yeah. So I guess the follow-up point I had was perhaps you could you could keep releasing sets at the same intervals, but you could maybe make the strength increase at a slower rate. So instead of going from like, power level 8,000 to power level 9,000, you're jumping up by like quite a lot. You just increase it slightly. So people are still encouraged to use the newer cards because it gives them an edge, but then at the same time, it doesn't completely invalidate the old favorites. Or perhaps also new cards that buff old cards. Like, can you imagine if we got some really good Leviathan support? Then all of the Leviathans, like King Tsunami and stuff from base set, might become playable again. So
yeah, that's an interesting area to look at as well. Is printing cards that have synergies with old cards. That's always been something that I would like to see more of. I'm trying to think of an example that we had back in the TCG. I'm not sure if you have one.
let me think about this.
Even cards like Soul Swap, right? Soul Swap enables a lot of like older cards. Like it brings life to them.
Yeah, that's true. It brings life. Soul Swap doesn't discriminate. It makes everything much better.
Yeah, it makes everything better. Like a Twin Cannon, for example.
Yeah. I guess the best example that I can come up with was in the very early OCG days, the release of Petrova is what made Aquan good.
Yes.
Just going through the OCG retrospective, when I was going through the decks, Aquan was receiving no attention or very little attention during his release in DM4, but then when DM9 rolled around, we got Petrova, and then suddenly Light was super relevant.
The curves, man. The curves are too good.
Yeah, like draw 5 cards. Yeah, one of these is Petrova, right? And then next turn, just drop them down.
Yeah, I still can't believe Aquan drew 5 cards. I don't really think that was a good idea.
Yeah. In saying that, though, yeah, sorry,
here's
you
an
first.
interesting. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, you go first.
I just had an idea that. What do you think about integrating some sort of ban list?
Ooh, I don't think we're at that point yet, but I think policing the format is certainly an interesting way to go. Right now, we just have this unspoken agreement that we don't play Bomb Bazaar, and then other than that, it's just sky's the limit.
Yeah. Because I was just thinking about other card games, like in Yu-Gi-Oh, you have the ban list, and then in Pokemon you have rotations, right?
Yeah.
So that could also be another way with dealing with power creep and old cards being not used, is just by having them completely out of the game.
Yeah, I think right now, given our very contained format in the TCG, we don't really need to institute a ban list yet. I think outside of Bomb Bazaar, maybe. And the reason I say that is because there aren't that many cards, so to speak, at least compared to like the examples you just mentioned, like Pokemon or even like OCG Duel Masters. There isn't really a need to put those sort of restrictions, because I think a lot of the time a ban list or a rotation is required. These are to stop degenerate combinations from being legal.
Yes.
So right now, because there aren't that many cards to mix and match, I don't think it's super necessary yet. But it could also depend on the kind of game you want to play. Like if you want the really slow cards to be viable, then naturally Corile and Spiral Gate are going to be major problems for that. So that's,
speaking about that, it's usually just a couple of offenders, right? It's not necessarily like you print the whole set and the whole set's the problem. It's usually a couple of cards.
Yeah. Guys, we're recalling all the cards. This set is not good for the game.
Recall the whole set.
It's funny you mentioned that, though, because like when you think about it, most sets, the vast majority of cards in a new set are usually pretty bad, right? It's only like 10-20% that are very good.
Yeah, and it's usually, like I said before, it's usually the super rares that are the attention grabbers.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, did I interrupt you? Were there other things that you wanted to talk about, mention on that same train of thought?
Um, well, maybe I'll come back, but
It was really
keep going.
important. You'd come back
it's
to it.
important, I'll remember.
In saying that, though, we do talk a lot about power creep, but there's something to be said about the timelessness of certain base set cards, whether in Duel Masters plays or in the TCG. Like, Terrapit seems to be making its way into a lot of decks. Not sure about
Mhm.
Bronze Arm.
Mhm.
So I just find that...
Yeah, even Bombazar,
Yeah.
I see a lot less decks playing him. You do have to. It is a bit different to the TCG because you do have to build a deck around Bombazar now.
Right.
You can't just flash him for.
Yeah. Yeah. And this deck has nature, this deck has fire. Let's just chuck in a couple of Bombazar. Could be good. Could be good.
Yeah.
I think that's actually pretty good. Okay, actually, I'm not sure if it's good game design or not, but how in the TCG, a lot of the popular cards were printed all the way back in base set. You know, Sako Hulkus, Bronze Arm, Terrapit, Holio.
Yeah, you have 6 mana shield triggers.
I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because as the life of a game progresses, those cards become harder to acquire. But in the same vein,
Right.
it's good to know that the people who invested a long time ago are being rewarded, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
I guess if you have reprint sets, that totally negates the exclusivity problem. But yeah, so just a totally random thought there. I didn't know where I was going with that.
But no, D&D, back in the TCG, they started reprinting some cards. There was like Death Smoke that got reprinted, and
Spiral
like
Gate.
Fairy Life.
Yeah,
Spiral
Fairy
Gate.
Life. Those are good ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, so for power creep, those are pretty much all of the things I wanted to discuss. You know, we sort of talked about what it is, why it exists, applying it to Duel Masters plays, and things that the measures we would take to make it so that people wouldn't feel so alienated every time a new set came out. Are there any other adjacent topics you wanted to cover, Andrew, in relation to power creep?
I thought I might touch on another good example of what they did with kind of balance and power creep in a way is you take a look at Wave Strikers.
Oh yeah.
So Wave Strikers in the new set, they gave them quite a big boost. So now all the like 3 mana, your 3 mana 6k Wave Strikers now have Double Breaker in addition to their ability. And also my favorite, or your favorite card as well, Macho Melon. Macho Melon is now 2k.
Oh,
and he gains
man.
4k. He's Double Breaker.
Oh, Macho Melon.
Man, he's the best, man.
He's the best.
I run 4 on my Wave Strikers.
And Kill Sign's not entirely necessary in Wave Strikers, right?
Yeah, and the kill sign's not entirely necessary, even though she got a buff as well. But talking about back to power creep is they buff these cards so that now they kind of fit better in the metagame itself. You have like I said before, you have these crazy mid-range decks that
Yes.
are running rampant. And really the only way to kind of stay on par with the power level of those cards is by having, these Wave Strikers have this Double Breaker ability now. So I think we also touched upon this before is, buffing old cards might be a good way to address this problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Wave Strikers is a prime example.
Wave Strikers. Oh man, speaking of Wave Strikers, we are working on we recently worked on a really strong Wave Strikers list. So stay tuned for that. It's going to come out as a deck profile at some point.
Yeah, there's probably also going to be a DMP version as well, sometime soon.
Oh boy, I can't
Or maybe
wait.
it'll be already released. You never know.
Yeah. Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. Right. So if that's all, I think that's pretty much all the time that we have for this episode. If you guys enjoyed it, obviously let us know. And if there are certain topics you would like for us to cover, also let us know in the comments. Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you guys later.